I'm going to tell you a couple stories. I'm going to talk a little bit about the hard stuff about entrepreneurship that I've never seen anybody talk about in a course. So to me, that's an unmet need. You'll tell me when we get done if I was right. I'm going to try to extract some lessons from these anecdotes. And of course, before we conclude, you'll have a chance, if you haven't already, to stop and ask some questions. And I'll wrap it up with some conclusions. So the first story I'm going to tell you is going to strike you as wildly irrelevant. In fact, you may think that I accidentally wandered into the wrong classroom because, I was lost. But first, since these are freestanding sessions, I will walk you through once again my background, which is I did start 4 companies with a group of docs out of Harvard Med School. I've been a mentor for a decade or so through MIT's venture mentoring service and through an extraordinary group in the Midwest called Pipeline. Based on those experiences, I broke down and wrote a book, which is now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, places like that. I took a break from starting businesses for a while and took over as CEO of a company that was publicly traded on the Hong Kong exchange. It was a dreadful mess and took 2.5 years to fix it, and I did. Had a couple normal jobs, went to a couple schools. You'll remember that I'm still working routinely as a performing musician and that I do a lot of volunteer work in homeless shelters. So the story is about diving boards. And indulge me because I will try to connect the dots. But until just a few years ago, I was a pretty active springboard diver. So I was up on the high board doing stuff that nobody at my advanced age ought to be doing. And some years ago, when one of my daughters was about 14 years old, we were at an outdoor pool in Lexington. I was up there doing what I was doing, and she came up and she said, "Daddy, you know that coach you're working with at BU with that 6 people? Will they let kids take that?" And I said, "Do you want to learn how to do this?" She said, "Yeah, I want to learn how to do that flippy stuff." I said, "Well, it's terrifying. Are you sure you want to do it?" "Yeah, I want to try it." And of course, I knew that most of her 14-year-old girlfriends didn't want to be in the same building as their father. So if she wanted to do something with me every Sunday morning for a couple of hours, I wasn't going to turn it down. So I did a little hustling, got her into the class. And first couple sessions, she did really quite well. The little squirt had some athletic talents and even went off the high board a couple times. The third session, the coach said, "Okay, you're ready to learn how to go into the water backwards off the high board. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to walk out to the end of the high board, turn around backwards, balance on the balls of your feet, bring your knees up close to your chest, wrap your arms around them, look at your knees, and roll over backwards. And when I say, 'Hut,' then I want you to let go of your knees, look back for the water, and go in head first." Now, the second time you do that, you think, well, what was all the drama about? That wasn't so hard. The first time you do it, you think, my life is over. The last thing I'm going to see is the ceiling of this pool, and then I will die. So diving etiquette is that when somebody's doing a dive for the first time, everybody else stops. Because even if it's just a front dive, if you've never done it before, you don't want the distraction. So the other 4 or 5 of us just stood there. Now, I have to tell you that before I agreed to do this, I said, "Look, you have to understand that I'm not going to be like one of those parents that stands on the sidelines while you play soccer. I'm there to take the class too. I need the coaching. So for that hour and a half or 2 hours, we're just fellow divers." She said, "Deal." I said, "And furthermore, though we all push each other, I'm not going to push you as your overachieving father. You're going to push yourself. Or not." She said, "Deal." So she went out onto the end of the high board. She balanced. She came back, grabbed her knees, rolled over backwards, and panicked. And instead of looking back for the water, She came forward, flat on her back, off the high board. She practically bounced off the surface of the water. I mean, she might have sunk 3 or 4 inches. Came up, tears in her eyes, swam to the edge of the pool. Back was bright red. And every one of the other 4 or 5 of us knew exactly what that felt like. We'd all done it. So everybody, you okay? So we let her sit on the edge of the pool, gave her a minute or so, and then we resumed our workouts. And I thought, this is a crossroads. And she sat there for a while and stopped weeping. After a couple minutes, she started looking up at the platform that the 2 high boards were on. Then she got up. She walked over to the platform and started up the stairs. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm going to go up there and do it right. Yes. Right? So she made that decision. Now, we all look at our experiences through the lenses of our own experience, but to me, entrepreneurship is a bit like that, because you're trying something new and it's scary. And when you flop, it hurts a lot. It's not something you're accustomed to. Most of us are not accustomed to a full body pancake. And when that happens, you're at a crossroads. Now what? Option A, which sensible people adopt, is to say, I'm never doing this again. This is crazy. Right? And there are many people who dabble in entrepreneurship. They get to the crossroads. They make that decision. Perfectly sensible. Option B is after you shake it off, you say, you know, I'm not dead. Maybe I'll try it again. So let's put that into the context of innovation. What comes with innovation? Well, actually, you're doing something new. You've probably not done it before. In fact, maybe nobody's done it before. Maybe there's no established roadmap, and maybe you don't know what you're doing. That uncertainty can be stressful. And you have to make decisions whether you know what you're doing or not. Inevitably, some of them will be wrong. So you have to ask yourself, are you okay with that? You've got to make 10 decisions today. 3 of them are going to be wrong. Can you live with that? And you're thinking about going into business for yourself. The good news, if you're your own boss, is that nobody will tell you what to do. The bad news is no one will tell you what to do. Right? And since you don't know what you're doing, sometimes this is a problem. So, in the course of writing that book, you may recall I interviewed a fair number of other entrepreneurs and melded their stories with some of my own. And it was funny because in the first few minutes of each interview, they would chat about some of the stuff you expected them to talk about. Here's the financing I got, here's our growth rate, et cetera. But pretty soon they started talking about stuff I didn't expect, which caused me to essentially rewrite the book to the joy of my editor. So here's Trevor. You know him, he's real. Here's a bit of his story. Now, he may not be entirely politically correct, so don't slag me for his words. But he said, I became an entrepreneur when I was 26. I was on the front page of the newspaper. I had a hot new car, a hot new girlfriend, and I had the world by the horns. There are a fair number of young men who would consider this to be living the dream. A year later, I lost everything. My car got repossessed. My girlfriend dumped me. I was living in my parents' basement. My job was being an assistant manager for Radio Shack. So, well, Trevor, how'd you feel about that? Open-ended question, right? He said, well, it took a couple of years to get the taste of failure out of my mouth. And I still remember it vividly, every day. That story I told you about my dialysis product business that failed. Still remember it every day. Ooh, sorry. But after a while, I decided that failure is not a fatal experience. It's a learning experience. This is important. You have to take care of yourself first, and you have to become a perpetual learner, because the most important trait for an entrepreneur to be successful is not intelligence. Please don't burst into tears. It's not creativity, it's adaptability. Here's another story. Laura showed up first day of our class. She was quite brassy. She was quite polarizing. Half the people in the room hated her. I loved her, thought she was great. But she'd had a big job. Actually, it was with GE, and among the things that she did, she ran a gene sequencing business and another whole business. Big paycheck. She quit, went all in on entrepreneurship, joined Pipeline, walked in, looked over the room, and decided she was clearly the smartest person in the room. And at 10:30 in the morning of the first day, after realizing she didn't know the answers to some fairly basic questions I asked her, she retreated to the ladies' room, sat in the stall, wept loudly, called her husband on the phone, said, "I've made a terrible mistake. You have to come get me. I have to get my job back. I'm not so suited for this life." Fortunately, her husband had been married to her for 19 years. He said, "Laura, knock it off. This guy just saved you at least 2 years and a couple $100,000. Go back in there and thank him and have another idea." She said, "Okay." And she came back in and she did have another idea. She spent $500,000 of her own money, and it was a bust. More tears, more heartache. Then she started another one. This one took off. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. And a little side part of that she was doing almost because she just liked it, independent of whether or not it made any money, ended up leading to a very attractive deal with Hallmark. You know, when you go into CVS and look at greeting cards, they're all from Hallmark. Well, she's got a video component now associated with Hallmark. Big deal. So I said, "Laura, tell me more." She said, "Well, when my second business was tanking, I remember the story you told about that kidney failure product and how you wanted your customers to do something and they were not going to do it. I realized my prospects are never going to do what I want them to do." "Well, what did you learn from this?" She said, "Validate, validate, validate. Never stop talking to your customers." The bit with the real estate guy, she had created a little video thing, presumably for people to record messages to their friends. You know, "I'm so sorry you've been sick," etc. And she started finding all these videos getting posted that said 1422 Smiley Avenue in Whoosy What's It, Kansas. And she realized that all these people were using it to do virtual tours of houses, real estate agents. She couldn't figure out why, because when she did a quick Google search, there were hundreds of applications that would allow you to do that. Her son was a competitive swimmer. He was a little squirt, but he was quite good. And there was a guy there whose son also was a competitive swimmer. She took him off for coffee. And she said, "Can you tell me why real estate," he ran a real estate business. She said, "Can you tell me why people are using this?" He said, "Let me see it." She had a look. He had a look. He said, "I can tell you why they're using it. It's so simple. I want it for all my agents." She said, "Okay." He said, "No, I want it for all my agents. I have 11,000 agents." She said, "Wait." Turned around real quick, looked him up on LinkedIn, realized that he's a big dog at a company that had 11,000 real estate agents, and it's grown since then. Now she's got 16,000 agents. The moral: Don't be afraid to reach out. All right. And she asked, who wins if I win? And this guy said, my agents win. Since I own the company, I win. And since you're getting business, anyway, you can see this, how this would work, right? So let's pause for a second. And before I get philosophical and start telling you what I think I learned, do you have any takeaways so far from what I've covered? Your prospects for success, failure, what happens next? Hyro. Yes, go ahead. Oh, yep, Aaron's going to bring you a microphone.
I think it's to get through failure faster. Like get through the pain of like the failure that you had start a startup and then fail and just keep trying.
Okay, thank you. What do you guys think? She right? Got another candidate down here. Yeah. This is Aaron's aerobic session for the week, by the way. Wait.
I think it's not about getting to the failure faster. It's about getting the fast recovery after failure.
Okay. Very few of us get it right the first time. Most of us encounter failure, and your point is to get, if you're going to fail, figure it out as quickly as possible. And yours is that what counts is what happens next. Right? All right, Maria, excuse me.
Yeah. I think about something even before that is to accept that we can be wrong. I feel sometimes maybe especially for people at MIT and stuff, sometimes we have that good student syndrome. Oh, we are smart, we cannot be wrong, but it's just like to accept it's fine, you're wrong. You can't just like keep learning.
Well, there are a fair number of you here who are associated with MIT. What do you think? Well, for what it's worth, Maria, I agree with you. We go through a lot of difficult training to get to the answer, and we think that's all it takes. So here's some of my thoughts based on the stories of the people I've interviewed and a few of my own. This is a lonely life. It's hard to find anyone to talk with. So I'm going to tell you a parable. That means it's not true, but it's sort of the distillation of a bunch of stories that I heard. Jack and Jill were a happily married couple, both working. By the time they'd had their second kid, they said, this is getting too difficult. We're both doing reasonably well. One of us should stay home and raise the kids, and the other can work, and we'll live off one income. They flipped a coin. Jack won. He got to stay home. Jill went to work. Jill had a startup. Jill found herself facing all kinds of decisions that she'd never had any training for. And she came home one day and she said, Jack, I swear, I don't really know what I'm doing. Jack had just scraped up the strange carrots from the floor, changed a couple of diapers, and tried to do the family bills, and he went nuts. And he said, what do you mean you don't know what you're doing? Do you realize what kind of jeopardy you're putting all of us in? We got a mortgage to pay. We've got bills all over the place. We're trying to save some money, and you don't know what you're doing? So two thoughts occurred to Jill. One was, geez, he's right. Stakes are pretty high. Second thought was, well, that didn't go very well. I'm not sure I should bring this topic up anymore when I come home. Now Jill doesn't have anybody to talk to. Furthermore, in the course of her job, and for that matter, yours, you're going to be rejected constantly. Potential clients will tell you no. Potential partners will tell you no. Financing sources will tell you no. Potential employees that you want to have work for, they'll tell you no. And you don't have anybody's shoulder to cry on. And if you've lived a life of accomplishment, where you've always been rewarded for being smart and hardworking, this will be hard for you. It's kind of interesting that frequently the most successful people are the B students, not the A students. That's really hard to countenance when you're breaking your behind in some engineering course here. Furthermore, not everyone out there has your best interests at heart. Here's another story. Glenn, friend of ours, former jet pilot, kind of a swaggering guy, built a good business. Spent 6 years, a lot of hard work, passed up a few family vacations because things going on at work were too important for him to get away. Raised some capital, secured some customers. It was growing nicely. And then his investors stole the business from him. Oops. So there's 2 lessons that come out of this. One is don't raise money from the wrong people. And 2, talk to Joe about how you can protect your intellectual property so that they couldn't steal it from him to begin with. Okay. Just to continue painting a dreary picture here. Hope you guys don't commit suicide before I finish, because there is some happy news near the end. There are a lot of people who are counting on you. Your family, your employees, your customers, and of course your investors. And when you flop, secretly, you just might doubt that you're the right person for the job. It's important publicly to present yourself as the capable captain. Be of good cheer. The ship is in good hands. But secretly, you worry you're not the right person. And if this gets really bad, you start thinking, God, maybe I'm a fraud. Maybe I'm just a poser. These are dark thoughts. So can you do anything about it? Is there any hope for us? Well, you have to accept up front that normal people can't help you, because you're not normal. If you're thinking about doing this, you're genetically flawed. You're misfits. Because if you were normal, you'd work for Amazon or some ordinary type job. Instead, you have chosen to leap into the world of uncertainty. And your normal friends don't understand those life choices, which means if you want to talk to them about the problems you're having with your capitalization table, or how you're struggling to grow your market share and position your product, they can't counsel you. Because secretly, they're thinking, you shouldn't be doing this to begin with. You should be working for the bank. So one of the answers is to find a community of people who are as crazy as you are. And yes, I'm presenting it in a slightly facetious fashion, but I have to tell you, every year we show up in Kansas for this thing, Pipeline, and every year there's about a dozen or so brand new people who have been laboring away in the Midwest, secretly convinced that they're just weird. And then they walk into the room, and within about an hour, they figure out, my God, everybody here is like me. These are my people. So find a group of people who are as crazy as you are, seek their counsel, offer yours, because that support network is a lifeline. So far, so good? Yeah? Okay, what else can you do? Well, since most of us don't get it right the first time, don't allow yourself to wrap your identity fully in your business idea. Because then if your business fails, you end up feeling like it is you that failed. That can be toxic. So, failed business does not mean a failed person. You are testing hypotheses. My hypothesis is that I can sell this for $6. Well, most of the time that's just not going to work. Maybe if I'm in one of the stores in an airport concourse or something, I can get away with it. But for the most part, that's a failed hypothesis. Have a new hypothesis. And maybe a different analogy is think of yourself as the jockey, not the horse. You are looking for the horse that's going to win the race. And if your current business idea isn't going to win the race, be dispassionate. It's a cliche these days, forgive me, to say failed quickly. That's not what we're trying to say. We're trying to say be analytical, be willing to say, there's a lot of good ideas out there. The one I picked isn't one. Find another one. Also, get a business advisory board. Anybody know what that is? Yes, ma'am. You do know? Okay, my bad. Would you be so kind as to tell us what a business advisory board is?
Well, it's a bunch of people who advise you on your business. And sometimes you pay them, sometimes you don't.
And what's the difference between that and a board of directors?
Well, they don't really participate in any decisions. They just advise. You can follow the advice or not.
Don't you get to be so smart? What a good answer. Thank you. The board of directors is in place to represent the shareholders. And if the board believes that you are not the right CEO, they actually have a fiduciary obligation to fire you and replace you with a CEO who will maximize the benefit to the shareholders. A business advisory board has no fiduciary responsibilities. They would just like to see you succeed. I have run a fair number of meetings with boards of directors, and part of my job was to persuade them that the captain was in control of the ship. It was not the place to stand there and say, I don't have the slightest bloody idea how to solve this problem. That's not what the board of directors wanted to hear. The board of advisors, however, you can assemble people who have deep expertise that you lack. I have the name Noel up there because Noel was on one of my business advisory boards, and we had invented a beverage that helps you sleep at night. And we needed to fill these little bitty bottles with a narrow aperture, which means it takes a long time to go down the assembly line because it's not like, it's like dribble, dribble, dribble. Right? And we had to make a relatively small number of bottles, 50,000 instead of 2 million. I had no idea where to find somebody who could do that. Noel had just retired as senior vice president of an awful lot of stuff at Pepsi. He said, let me make a couple phone calls, Bob. About 2 days later, problem was solved. So add people to your business advisory board who have deep expertise that you don't have, and don't be bashful about standing in front of them and saying, I don't know how to solve this. Help me out. Give them a little bit of equity. Most of them don't want you to give them cash. They would rather you keep the cash in the business. Give them a little bit of ownership in the company. And if you're staffing up with a business advisory board, I've tried it a couple different ways. Here's one that I find works well for me. I don't want them to come in and immediately assume they know the answers, pound on the table and tell me the answers. I would rather they listen to me for a while first and then provide the answers. I also find that if I'm going to stand there and say, I don't know what I'm doing, it would be helpful if most of them said, yeah, you do. You're going to be fine. Fix this. And, cheerleaders. But it's really helpful to have one or two. Well, my friend Steve was on my last one. And when I would come up with an idea, Steve would give me 10 reasons why it would not work. And I would have thought of 7 of them. The other 3, I should have thought of that. So it's a useful part of your business advisory board. And you want to balance their counsel. Don't just listen to the cheerleaders, and don't just listen to the one who says nothing you're trying will ever work. Balance it. By the way, there are also resources right here in town. If anyone in your senior management team is connected to MIT, then you can avail yourself for free for the services of venture mentoring service. Right? They take no equity. They don't charge you. It's the sweetest deal going if you're a startup. And Harvard has the Harvard Innovation Lab, and there are other resources about town as well. So find some help, get some help. Know, of course, when to ignore the help, because I have been in situations where the advice they gave was bad. What else can you do? Well, this sounds hopelessly obvious, but it's incredible how frequently this gets abused. Frizzed out entrepreneurs make lousy decisions. If you've been staying at the office until 3 o'clock in the morning, night, after a couple of weeks, really stupid stuff starts looking like it makes sense. And you make really boneheaded decisions because you're just too tired to think straight. Don't do it. And from the Department of Obviousness department, here's some steps that are often ignored. Enough with the pizzas. All right? Eat right, get some exercise, get some sleep. Go home. Take care of your loved ones. You will find, if you don't, that one day they will remember that you weren't there long after you have forgotten why you weren't there. I got dragged into one of these things because I was absolutely as toxically focused as any other entrepreneur. And I got signed up to coach my kids' after-school softball team. And practice started at 4 o'clock. What? I can't do that. I'm running a business. The first day, I was out on the field with a glove, teaching these kids how to turn a double play. And I thought, I'm playing ball with my kid. How could I be so stupid as to not see how important this is? Right? Do this. And then invest some time where you can in activities that'll recharge your batteries. Whether you're a runner or a rock climber, whether you like art, whether you like playing music, whatever it is. And I can tell you that when I was poised on the end of a high board about to do something ridiculous, I was not thinking about raising more capital. I was thinking, how do I survive this? This totally wipes the screen. Right? Make some time for that. All right. A week ago, I told you that I had a book launch party. Anybody remember that? All right, let me set the stage in case you guys have had those thoughts crowded out by all that we've covered in the past week or so. Writing a book is really hard. I would work at a trade show all day and then retire to my cheesy little motel room and write another chapter in the book in the middle of the night. And then I would look at it the next day and think, this is crap. Whatever possessed me to think I could write a book? And I would dump it and start over again. It was hard. And in fact, only 4% of the people who set out to write a book actually publish the thing. So it's not just me that thinks it's difficult. And at the end of the year, it was done. We had a cover. It was available for sale at Amazon. I said, I got to have a party. So we found a place out on the seaport, lovely view, invited friends. And I invited 3 entrepreneurs that I knew to come up and sit on stools next to me. Everybody had a microphone. And I said, guys, if you were looking at an audience of people who are thinking about entrepreneurship, what would you say to them? Just like that, all 3 of them said, don't do it. And this, of course, precipitated 2 fairly obvious questions. Why would you say that? And given that you've obviously ignored your own advice and done it, in fact, several of you have done it several times, why on earth? Well, here's a question that you may be asking. Why would anyone do this? This whole entrepreneurship thing sounds like an exercise in self-abuse. Why would you sign up for that? Well, I have some answers I'm going to put up, but I'd love your speculations first. Why would anyone go into this field? You have to be completely nuts to do it. Thoughts? Did I scare all of you away? Did you find yourself thinking there's no way I'm going to ever do this? This is ridiculous. You're puzzled, aren't you? It just doesn't make any sense. All right, give her another try here. To the lady in the red skirt, orange.
Well, I would say, why would I do this?
That's a good answer.
Okay.
Why would you do this?
Because there's something I can contribute. I want to help people with the knowledge that I know, and I want to. I don't feel very happy working for an employer. I felt there's less control. It just, I want to be able to, in some way, contribute to
Okay.
other people.
So, remember what I said about all you guys are essentially misfits? Exhibit A, right? Unhappy working for other people, secretly want to help others. Actually, I'm teasing. Those are very good answers. Anybody else? Up. Thank you, Joe. Go ahead.
Because I'm unemployable. Like, the truth is, again, going off of what, you said, right? I hate working for other people. I find myself distracted at my job, thinking of all the other things that I could be doing and contributing to the world. And it feels like every time I set foot in an office or I'm sitting at my desk, it's like my mind is buzzing with, all the different ideas I have for my startup.
Thank you. Were you going to answer as well?
I think most of people do it because they cannot not to do it.
You guys hacked into my computer this afternoon while I was preparing these slides, didn't you? There's a bunch of reasons. These are all good reasons. It could be that you do it because you have to. You feel a real drive to create something that's better. You want to be your own boss, even if it means you have to take a pay cut to do it. Maybe you're just too weird to do anything else. Right? Some of us can do that corporate thing for a year or maybe 2 years, and then we find ourselves feeling like my brains are dissolving and I'm afraid to tilt my head because I'm afraid they'll just leak out. Right? I'm sitting in endless meetings listening to people yammer on about nonsense because they want the boss to feel like they've made a contribution. I have a boss who I can't understand how he can even find his way home. And I would love to be contributing something. Shortly after I got out of business school, we scattered to the winds, and one of my friends took a job working for Procter & Gamble, and she completely got inoculated with their corporate culture. And she was made the product manager for Coast deodorant soap. And at the cocktail parties in December, when we all got back together, her parting words at everyone was, "Now, y'all don't forget, buy Coast deodorant soap." I thought, this poor thing has been attacked by zombies or something. I totally don't understand this. So, but that's frequently normal. And if that does not appeal to you, maybe you're just too weird to do anything else and have to be in it. Or maybe you want to improve the quality of life for others. I had a fella come spend a day with me. He had lunch with us that day as well. He said, "Bob, you told me to find my customers. I found too many of them. I need your help sorting out which ones I ought to go after and in what sequence." We went out to dinner the night before, some cheesy seafood place, and I listened to him talk for a while. And the next day we started looking at his options through the lens of how do you build a business that will become a good acquisition target. And by lunchtime, I said, "You know what? I think you're lying to yourself. Because when you talk about selling your company and making a big sack full of money, you're kind of perfunctory. When you talk about being able to support that orphanage in Venezuela, you light up like Times Square. I think what you want is to build a good business. And if someday somebody rings your doorbell and offers you a sack full of cash, you'll have the conversation. But what you really want to do is help the healthcare people that are your customers and contribute money to this orphanage in Venezuela. And he was quiet for about 30 seconds. And he said, God, I feel so much better. The shoes didn't fit. The shoes I pointed out to him would be a better fit, made him feel hugely relieved. One more quick story. A friend of ours, Mike, was in the business of laying fiber in to bring internet to rural sections of Nebraska. And he was having all kinds of trouble. His competitors were suing him. His employees frequently were on a rampage because one of the things Mike wanted to do, he said, some people can't afford us, but I think everybody ought to have internet. And I think that we ought to provide it for free for those people who can't afford us. But I don't want to just walk up to somebody and say, excuse me, are you poor? But the schools all have these school lunch programs, and families that are below a certain line get their lunches subsidized. I should be able to get the names from the schools and just provide free internet to those people. And he was in the home of one of them doing an install. And Mike was dressed just like all the other workers, you know, a shirt with his name on it and dirty hands and all that stuff, grubbing around, running the cables through. And the woman who lived in that house came up to him and she said, are you Mike? And he said, well, yeah. And she said, I really want to thank you for all this. He said, ma'am, we are serious believers in privacy. And you don't need to say a word. I'm just happy to install it along with my crew here. She says, no, come to my kitchen. There was a bag of groceries there. And she said, I work a normal 8-hour job, but I have to break it into segments because we don't have internet and my kids who are in school get their homework assigned on the internet. And so every day I stop work, I pick them up after school, I park outside the library so they can hitchhike onto the free Wi-Fi from the library. And we sit in the car so they do their homework until they get cold. And then I take them to their friends' houses and they rotate through a group of their friends because their friends have Wi-Fi and we don't. That sack of groceries is because tonight will be the first time in probably 4 years that I'm going to be able to cook dinner and have dinner with my kids and not have to break my day up and go back to work. So when I asked Mike, what keeps you going during the dark times? That was it. He said, I want to correct something that needs to be fixed, and I want to improve the quality of life for others. A couple more reasons why you might want to do it. You might want to create wealth. That's perfectly reasonable. Leave a legacy behind for your family and yourself. And we do know a couple of entrepreneurs for whom the cycle, the paradigm, build it, sell it, put some money away, repeat. Joe and I know at least a few people who've had 2 exits in the last 10 years. This is what they want to do. It could be that you just love the buzz. You get all worked up over cool technologies that can solve problems you're interested in. I spent 2 days last week on Cape Cod at the world famous Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, which you would never have heard of if you don't know anything about oceanography, but there's 1,000 scientists in the organization, and they're doing really cool stuff. One group figured out that coral reefs are dying, and they figured out how to rebuild the reefs using sound. I was just absolutely in a lather. I just thought, oh my God, I would love to be involved in something like this. So maybe that's what, rocks your world. Maybe you like the odd mix of creativity and discipline that's required to make this work. Your turn. You got any questions? So far, so good. Should I steam on? Okay, then I will steam on. You'll recall that we started asking, why do most startups fail? And when I studied this, I said the answers fall into 2 buckets. One is you're missing skills you didn't know you needed. And the other is you need to re-engineer your mindset. And by that, I don't mean you have to have a transcendental experience while you're writing your business plan. We talked about the missing skills in the last 5 nights. What I've just talked about, think like a scientist. Don't worry if your idea fails. It doesn't mean you're a failure. Keep looking, get some help, take care of yourself. That's what I'm talking about with re-engineering your mindset. And also accept that if this is the life for you, it's because you're weird. All right, I do have some closing remarks, but first, I've done a fair number of speaking engagements, but one of the things that I lack, and I have to break down and do this, is a promotional video. In the trade, it's called a sizzle reel. You know, a little music plays. The speaker stands up there and says stuff, right? Pictures of the audience saying, right? And you have to, I mean, there's a formula. You got to do it. And I got to do it. And so one of the things that I would love to populate my little video with is the odd comment that said, yeah, the guy was helpful. So if you care to offer any of those, I could use the help. Up to you. And of course, a lot of the stories that I've told and many more are in this little book, which is available for short money. Okay. Do you have any questions before I offer a 1-slide summary of the last hour? Go ahead. Oh, up in the corner. Take it away, Aaron.
Why didn't you become a full-time musician?
I was a full-time musician, played 7 nights a week for a year, made my living, loved the music. I was the least schooled and probably least talented member of the band. All the horn players had graduated Berklee School of Music. And I would be sitting there saying, what on earth is a minor 7 flat 5 chord? And they'd all be thinking, oh God, where'd we get this guy? It was an intense learning experience for me, public humiliation being quite motivating. And I loved it, loved the music, but it's a god-awful way to make a living. My standards were very low at the time. I didn't much care where I woke up. And I did a bunch of things that I can never talk about publicly. And one day I said, you know, I'm never going to stop playing, but I got to find another way to make a living. Maybe I'll break down and go to business school. And I did. I applied to one. They accepted me. Joe and I were part of a program of a small group of psychotics, jammed the entire first year into the summer. It was pretty sleepless. Did the entire second year in the remaining 9 months, and included a thesis along the way. Didn't sleep much. I was wildly unprepared at the time. I had never had accounting, never had economics, never had any of the things, never seen a computer at the time. So it was difficult. And at the end of the day, I said, I've shifted the balance. I love the music. I continue to practice, right? Discovered I knew how to sing one day and play all the time. Love it. At this point, I decided what I want to do is I want to spend my time with entrepreneurs and innovators and play music. Yes, ma'am. Oh, who's got a mic? Aaron?
It's okay. I want to ask a question from the Zoom chat real quick and we'll pass it along.
Can you stand by a second? All right, let's hear your Zoom question.
Thank you. All right. So this comes from Maggie. How much equity should we give the advisors? Is there a structure for this kind of payment? And how can we tell how committed our advisory board will be?
Good questions. Okay. I did not give equity to anyone. Oh, I'm looking up there. Would you guys who are on Zoom just all and you happen to have your cameras on, would you wave just so we know that there's life out there? Hey, thank you. All right, it's not just a bunch of pretty faces. Thanks very much. I had had my advisory board for a year, and one day it was pretty clear that they were helping me quite a lot. And I was giving them nothing in return other than my attention. And they got some gratification from the fact that I would actually take their advice, because not everyone does. But it occurred to me I should give them something. And so at the next advisory board meeting, I stood up and I said, well, I'd like to give you a piece of the business, and I don't know how much to give you. So you're my advisory board, advise me. And they all sort of scratched their heads. And I said, well, I was thinking 2% of the company. He said, no, that's too much. We usually get somewhere between 0.5% and 1% of the company. So give us 0.5 point apiece. And structure it as warrants or options or something. I can't remember how we did it. But there is a mechanism. Joe can tell you how to do it. Dodge that bullet. And they found that to be quite acceptable. And to come back to your question of how can you tell who's committed, after a year of working together, that became obvious. So the ones who weren't participating, I didn't make the offer to, and just said, well, thank you for your service. We're going to rotate some people out and bring some new people in. And I'm grateful for your service, and goodbye. Okay. Thank you for the question.
I was very curious to know what was the best and the worst moment, like in your entrepreneurial journey. The best and the worst.
Well, there was not one. There have been a lot of them. Well, I had failed more times than most people when I started down this road. And probably the only reason I survived that intense year that Joe and I spent together was I discovered that the people who got up and went out in the hall and wept were the ones who had never failed anything before. Whereas I'd failed plenty of things and didn't like it, but it didn't kill me. And still, I got pretty worked up about some technologies that were useful in healthcare. And I genuinely felt that it would help make at least a small group of people better off. And so one of the worst times was when was the story I told you guys my first night here. Nobody wanted it. This was baffling to me. Why on earth would they not want it? And of course, I was in a corporate situation where I had to face my coworkers every single day. It was not the same as you're sitting home alone. You can look in the mirror if you want to feel bad. I had people who were actively making me feel bad. That was bad. There was another time with one of my companies when I raised most of the money from a rookie venture firm. They did not know what they were doing, and they ran out of money. Oops. So the day they were supposed to give us the next tranche, as it's called, of funding, they said, well, we don't have any money. We're bust and we can't fund you. Oh, and by the way, there's a regulation in Massachusetts that if you keep people in your employ and they think that they're going to get paid, you are personally liable for their paychecks. Translation, I had to fire everybody that day with no notice. That was a bad day. So if we had 2 more hours, I would tell you endless stories about bad days. There have been plenty of good days, don't get me wrong, but hold that thought. I'm wrapping it up. Entrepreneurship is not an easy life. It has its rewards, but only for some people. And tonight's talk is how you might cope with these hard times. And I honestly hope you will never need it, because I would not wish these hard times on anyone. But if you do need it, maybe one day you'll think, oh yeah, Bob told me this would happen. And maybe that will help you find some resilience. I think I've given this a bit of thought, given that it's a difficult and often lonely life. What are some things that tend to make people happy? And I came up with 3. One is a sense of purpose, something that gets you motivated to get out of bed in the morning and say, today I'm going to go help this mom finally be able to have dinner with her kids. You need hope that you can actually accomplish what you hope to do. And it's my opinion that you need to be part of a community of like-minded individuals. So I would encourage you to determine what is it that is your purpose, build some hope, and find the community. And I wish you much success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. When you raised this as a topic, I didn't quite understand what you were going to do. And then
Well, it was the
then I
national
realized
debut. How could you know?
that's it. What a fantastic debut. This is something that a lot of people have to hear. So thank you for sharing with us.
You're
And it
welcome.
brought back a bunch of memories of stuff we've been through.
Oh,
It's so
God.
painful.
Yeah. Uh, Joe and I each aged on an accelerated scale when we started doing this stuff. I would spend a year as an entrepreneur and be 5 years older than I was a year previously. It's just, right? I mean, you learn a lot, you grow a lot, you age a lot. I mean, it's, yeah.
Are there any final questions for the group, or you'll, of course, be here for?
I don't mind wrapping up a little early unless somebody's got something they want to talk about.
Yeah, we've got one more from the Zoom. This comes from an email address, I think. Do you think business school is essential? How do you get recognized without the business school pedigree? Is any business degree better than no business degree? As a current business school student, I hope the answer is it is necessary and that my hundreds of thousands of dollars are justified.
Well, I'm sorry, I missed that last part. I was busy thinking, how do I dodge this one? So say that last part again.
No, it's unimportant.
Well, where's our PR firm when we need it? I think that that's a nuanced answer. You can make a very good argument that economically, business school does not make sense. You might drop, pick a number, $150,000 on 2 years of school. Maybe more, right? Yeah. And you will not be earning whatever you were earning during those years. So if you were earning, I don't know, 100 grand a year and you're out of the market for 2 years, you add that onto the cost of school, you're getting close to $500,000, which means that your incremental earnings will take a while before you pay back that which you lost. The most successful entrepreneur I ever worked for had an undergraduate degree from San Diego State, California. But he created a home care company called Caremark, sold it to Baxter for $576 million, kept a piece of it for himself, substantial piece for himself, and then went out and bought the company where I met him in a leveraged buyout with Alex Brown and, repeat. No business school. But he had that drive. Oh my God. Do not get between the water buffalo and the water because you will be stampeded. And this guy was like that. And so on the one hand, no, I can make a pretty good argument that it doesn't make any sense at all. If your background equips you to do what we're trying to do. For someone like me, I taught school and projects in Philadelphia for 4 years. I was bulletproof at the time. I was a pharmaceutical salesman for a year. I did medical research in otolaryngology at Tufts Med School for a year. And I was a professional musician for a year. That didn't add up to anything. Well, maybe someone with a short attention span, but no credentials. And nothing which suggested that I could handle technology. So for me, going to business school at an institute of technology was a very useful credential. It sort of validated that maybe I had at least a couple of lights on. So I think you have to answer the question in the context of what do you already know, what's missing, and what are you trying to do? And will business school fill in the blanks? Because it's an expensive, difficult decision. Sorry? Oh, okay. So thank you, whoever it was in Zoom who asked that question.
Mark. Mark asked the question.
Oh.
Yeah.
Who?
Mark.
Oh, Mark. Mark, aren't you in Toronto? Dude.
Yeah, I am, but I didn't want to miss it.
All right.
Okay.
You owe me a beer.
I do.
All right. Anybody else? Oh, okay.
If there is only one advice, give like the young people like me, what would be the advices? And if there's only one book you recommend, what would be the book will be?
I swear I've never seen this guy before. Well, I probably would echo, since I don't know you, and forgive me, the one piece of advice would probably be don't do it. If you are going to do it, I do believe that there was a great deal that I learned from the other entrepreneurs in writing the book I wrote. I write like I talk. I've got a lot of people who call me up, who know me, who read the book and said, oh my God, Bob, I hear your voice in my head with every page. So if you find what I have covered with you guys in the last 3 nights to be useful, my book would be good. The Lean Startup is actually good. And there's an exceptional book out there. One of the things I use to select business books is, are they short? Because the way this usually works is you write 50 really good pages, and then your publisher says, I can't sell your book for $30 if it's only got 50 pages. Please say the same thing 3 more times. And then I can sell it if it's got 200 pages. So most business books are junk for that very reason. They're so dilute that it just kills you to try and get through the whole thing. This one's short, and it's simply called Leaders. And I still go back and read it every couple of years. And I think it's dense, it's to the point, and it's brief. So, and I was a little bit facetious when I said don't do it, but I do think if you're signed up for this course and you've soldiered through these last sessions, you're way better prepared to decide whether or not you want to go into this life or not. The people who really suffer are the people who impulsively make the decision without doing any homework. And they jump over the wall and right into the abyss. Right? What was that scene from Star Wars, that thing with all the teeth in the sand? Right? And they get digested for 1,000 years. I think the people who don't do the research are at risk of doing that. So, does that help at all? Okay.
Yeah. Bob, one thing we really didn't talk about is if you're thinking about this, when should you do it, right? As you graduate or get some experience. And I think statistics show that a lot of companies aren't started by entrepreneurs until they're well into their 30s. But we know the history of the ones that, leave college and found Microsoft or Facebook. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, but mostly they come from Trevor, whose story I told up front. We said, if you've never run a marketing campaign, you're going to have to do one when you start your own company. You're not prepared. If you've never hired people, made some mistakes, and had to fire anybody, you're not prepared. If you've never gone through a little financial analysis to figure out where you're losing money and why, you're not prepared. So there's a great deal of merit, in my mind, to putting in a couple of years, seeing how the big companies do it. And no disrespect to you, because I get as uncomfortable and miserable as you in those situations. But those first couple of years were incredibly instructive. Here's how you set up an expense report. Here's what you do when one of your employees decides to buy $40 a shot scotch and put it on their expense report. Here's what you do if you promoted the guy that drives the forklifts to manager of the people who drives forklifts and never taught him how to be a manager. And here's what you do when you discover that a couple of employees that you count on have substance abuse problems. Right? I mean, this is the sort of stuff that causes your ship to crash on the rocks. And it's very useful to spend a couple of years just soaking up that cultural stuff as to how does this, and then of course you figure out this is driving me crazy, I gotta go. But that essential learning, I think, is time well spent. I don't know, you have comments on this? You have thoughts?
I think there's certainly a benefit for doing something like that. In the answer to the business school question, I would say some, but not most of the skills you learn translate into the entrepreneurial life. But your knowledge of how organizations work becomes very valuable, because if you have a company and eventually you're going to exit, it's most likely to be through an acquisition, or you're going to partner with large companies because they can't innovate very fast. They're looking, for something they can add in for innovation. So they tend to acquire companies. And if you understand how large companies work, you can begin to think about how your company will fit into that. Just understanding that. I mean, as you and I have talked about my little corporate partner adventure was helpful, although that didn't save that one. But anyway, I think there are some skills you can get for spending time in an organization. But if you have passion now, if you've tested the other stuff out, and you can handle it financially, and your significant other is on board, very important, then go for it.
The less you know, however, the more you will need to assemble people who can guide you. Okay? And the more you have to brace yourself for the fact that you're going to have to listen to them. Okay. So, well, my friends, the presentation that comes next, I've actually had a sneak peek at. It's really good. You're going to love what Marina has to say. And it's been a great pleasure working with you guys over the past 2 weeks. I wish you much success. Thank you for your time.